Good day, grade 12 learners, and welcome to today's English home language lesson. My name is Vash Suchit, and this lesson is proudly brought to you in collaboration with the Gauteng Department of Education and Cybono Discovery Center. Well, grade 12s, what's happening in your life thus far? I'm guessing the anxiousness is there, the nerves are short, and you are a bit stressed out in terms of what's going to come the next few days. Now, if we had to count it, we would say 3 days, including the weekend. However, we know the weekend's not even normal days because that's when you're going to be swatting and you're going to be stressing and all of those things. So I'm going to say to you, you have literally a few hours before you sit for Monday's paper with the NSC exam, where you're going to be writing English Home Language Paper 3. And that is the subject, unfortunately, for you grade 12s that you have to pass really well. If you fail it, you're not going to be able to pass your exam. Remember that, okay? So it's 12 years that you're dealing with where you won't be able to get a certificate. So it is scary and it is supposed to scare you because if you don't pass English, you don't pass your exam. So make sure you are going to take this weekend or this time, this next few hours, and maximize every opportunity you have to get the marks in your home language paper on Monday. It is paper 3, the one that is costing you 100 marks. And you'll have 3 hours to write this paper, yes, or 2.5 hours to 3 hours in terms of your reading time and all of your admin and things like that. So make sure that you are going to get the maximum marks. So let's be focusing on paper 3 today, and this lesson is going to be dealing particularly with paper 3. Now, before I get into the actual structure of this lesson, I want to draw your attention to the fact that in paper 3 grade 12s, you would be having what? You have a section A, all right? And you have a section B. Now, section A, you will remember, costs you 50, and also section B. Now, section A is the essay questions, remember. Now, we've dealt with this previously when I did a lesson about a week ago with you in paper 3, and I said to you, please go back and focus on the 4 genres in terms of essay writing. Remember, essay writing is creative writing, and that just means exactly and your descriptive essay. Exaggerate these imageries, make it be bigger than it actually is, and get your audience, which is going to be your markers in this instance, get them to be interested in the content of your essay for the narrative and the descriptive. Remember, narrative is basically where you're entertaining somebody. You're telling them a story about an experience that you had thus far, or you are talking about issues that is you've experienced in your life thus far, okay? Now, obviously, grade 12s, you're not going to take an essay from the internet and try and stuff it into a topic. No, it's not going to work like that. You're going to read the topics given to you. You're going to underline the important details of what that question is asking of you. And then you're going to talk about those aspects in your essay. So your content has to match the title given to you. Please always remember the golden rule in terms of this paper. All right, content matches what the topic is asking of you. So your narrative, remember I spoke about the fact that there must be a hook, for example. There must be that interesting detail that catches our attention and makes us want to read your essay, all right, of 400 to 450 words. It must continue to intrigue us. Whatever you're saying in that essay must intrigue us and make us want to read further than we actually are at that particular point. Include nice imagery. Include a synopsis of details that are relevant to the topic. All those things you've got to look at. Remember, paragraphs must be there. Your introduction capturing the attention with a short, quick 2 lines or 2 sentences to grab our attention. Okay, then you've got your body where you've got your 3 to 4 paragraphs now, where you're going to also employ the use of that Peel method or the 5 W's and the H. Remember, the Peel method is you're making your point or your topic sentence is there, okay? Then you're supplying evidence or an explanation of what you're saying, all right, in that particular essay and or paragraph, and you're focusing on that content, then essentially after explaining and giving us the evidence and all those things, you're going to link the next paragraph to the preceding paragraph. So go over the peel method. Worry about also the issue if you're not too good with the peel one. Look at the 5 W's and H. In other words, understand who are you speaking about, or then what are you speaking about? Where is the events taking, or where are these events taking place? Sorry. Okay. So who, what, when, where is it taking place? Okay. Why are those things happening to you as a person or the person you are talking about in the essay? And then obviously the H is how did this actually continue to take place in your life, for example, if you're relating an event. Okay, so that is the things you need to focus on. Remember also the other 2 or 3 genres you've got is your reflective essay. Your reflective essay, I said to you previously, grade 12, is you reflecting on life thus far. There's been issues in life. There's been social media events taking place. There's current events happening at this moment in time as we sit right now or speak. Those events is where the content's going to come from these examination papers. So look, keep up in terms, keep up with the trends of what's happening currently in life. Okay, the events that are taking place, and familiarize yourself with that. And once you've done that, you'll be able to answer your essay question papers. Okay. So your reflection is of what the experience you've had thus far, where you are currently, and possibly where you would move to in the next 2 or 3 years of your life. So you're reflecting, you're doing a deep thinking, a concentrated, focused effort of what events have brought you to where you are currently and where you're going to go through, for example. So you try and use the flashback technique if you can there, okay? Concepts I'm mentioning here, if you're not familiarizing yourself with this, please go back and look at the previous videos as well as the content that your teachers have done at school so that you can make sure you have covered those things I've mentioned, okay? Then in terms of your discursive and your expository essay. Okay, so firstly, sorry, the discursive and argumentative essay, those two. Remember, there's a fine line in terms of those two essays. One side is the argument where you are arguing only one viewpoint. All right. And you are saying, this is my viewpoint. This is why I hold this viewpoint. And you're giving evidence to back up that viewpoint. That's your argumentative essay. On the discursive side, in terms of that genre, remember you giving us both the pros and the cons of this particular argument, and you're going to then mix it up perhaps and give us a sort of a solution into saying, okay, but based on whatever I've said so far, maybe a different way could be a way to look at it. So that kind of thing, okay? Both sides being explored in the expository essay. Sorry, the discursive essay. All right. So please remember these things, okay? And the other one, the last one, is obviously the factual one, where you're giving all the facts, no opinions being included, stats and all those things being included. That is another type of essay. So please go over the genres in terms of your essay writing, okay? But the golden rule of this paper and essay writing is please write about what you know. Do not go and choose a topic where you have no idea what is being spoken about in that topic and you just want to write. Okay? Proper planning will always give you success. So make sure that you plan what you want to say in terms of a rough piece of planning, okay? Because you're going to then only have time to write your final in this exam. So do your planning, your sketch, and your important information you can speak about, and then go into the final. Right. So please, grade 12s, if you don't plan, you won't know what you're going to say, and you won't know if your content is relevant to the topic or not. So please do that. All right. Now, I've quickly gone over the essays, and you will go back this afternoon or whenever you're going to go back, maybe tomorrow or Sunday before you write. Please revise the types of essays: the narrative, the descriptive, the reflective, the argumentative, the discursive, and the expository essay. And look at the technique of using either the Peel method or the 5 W's and the H. Then also make sure you are including obviously your introduction and your body of 3 to 4 paragraphs, and then obviously your conclusion where you're tying up this entire content that you've spoken about in the essay. All right, so go over that, please, grade 12s. Okay, that's 50 marks. Now, let's say you've done the essay and you didn't feel very comfortable with the essay question, okay? But you did your best. You still have an opportunity to get another 50 marks, which is where our focus is today of the transactionals. So we are going to be dealing with the transactional writing genres, okay? And I'm going to give you techniques again on how to actually get the marks for these 2 transactionals you need to produce in section B of the paper. So remember, 3 pieces of work: the essay for 50 mark and 2 transactionals of 25 marks each, which then gives us the total of 100 marks for this paper. All right, so we will deal with the techniques on how to answer the question paper in terms of the transactionals in section B as well. Right, so let's look at what is required. I did mention to you already, 50 marks. All right, the word count here for each of your transactional would be between 180 and 200 words. Now, we are not talking about, for example, the heading or the subheading before your content. So the actual content from the first word where you start to the last word in that transactional will be focused on. So please make sure that if it says 200 words as the limit, that you write 200 words. Don't go and write 300 words, for example, grade 12s, because if the meat of what you want to say is in the last 50 words or the last 100 words, and we stop at 200 words, for example, we're not going to read what you want to say, all right, or get your point. So remember to stick to the word count for your transactionals and your essay as well. All right, so 200 words each for the transactional. So in other words, you've got 400 on the essay or 450, and then you've got 200 on one piece of transactional and another 200 words on the other transactional. So 2, 4, 6, say about 650 words if you are trying to maximize the word count in this paper, okay? Nothing else, but all 3 pieces according to those values. Right, so you will be given approximately 80 minutes to answer the essay question, okay, in section A. And then in section B, we are giving you then around 70 minutes. We're saying should be sufficient for you to do this particular pieces. And if you're targeting about 35 minutes each for your 2 transactionals, you will be well within that time frame to finish your section B. Right, so with regards to transactional writings, grade 12, the difference between the creative essay and the transactional is the following. It is the fact that you are writing for a purpose, meaning you are expecting a response to what you have said. Obviously, you're not going to get the response immediately when you're writing, okay? But the idea is that if I do a particular transactional piece, that there will be a response coming from a person who's going to be reading that or listening to that piece of work. Okay, so that is important to remember. You are writing for a purpose and you will require a response from the recipient of this particular essay or a particular transaction. Right, so therefore it is a transaction between yourself, who is the sender, and the receiver, who is the recipient here. Okay, which will then be your marker in this case. So what are we looking at in terms of transactionals, right? Please, the golden rules to remember again is to read all the topics. Make sure that when you go through those 6 pieces or 6 topics that you are given, where you're going to choose 2, you are already, while reading those 6 topics, you are gauging which one is going to be the most appropriate one for me. So you'll choose, remember, 2 as the final that you're going to be doing. But as you go through the other 4, you might think, okay, I want to tweak this maybe and change this topic or whatever it is. So your planning phase is where you get the opportunity to change the topic if you're not happy with it. All right. So please remember that. The other thing at this point I want to say to you is, please, if you are when you are planning, remember, if you strike out your plan and then you write your final piece of work, okay? We are going to mark the final piece of work, obviously. So please make sure that once you've struck up something, you know that that is not going to be read by the marker. So you have discarded that piece of work, remarking the one which you have then redone after that. Okay, so please be aware of the difference between your planning, your draft, and your final piece when you are doing this. So what you're going to do when you get the paper is, firstly, also take the 10 minutes reading time, read through the paper, all the instructions, and hopefully you still have about 5 minutes remaining from the 10 minutes where you start to read the topics, all right? And you're gauging now which topic is most relevant. So remember to read all the topics and recall that the texts are transactions, meaning that you are going to expect that response. So write down a few ideas for each of the topics. So let's say topic 1 is here. You will then maybe read it and write maybe 2 or 3 points like that. So you know, okay, these are the kind of ideas I want to speak about with topic 1. If I'm going to choose topic 2, these are my other ideas I want to speak about. So by the time you work through the 6 topics, you can see where you are more comfortable with ideas that you know a lot about. Okay, again, remember, you want to write about what you know. Right. So, secondly, you're going to underline and highlight all the keywords within that topic. All right. Because then it's going to point you in the direction of what the examiner wants you to answer with that particular question. So please select the important information when you underlining or highlighting. Furthermore, remember the 3 things that are going to be mentioned now. Firstly, there's a purpose for the text. The question you're asking yourself is, why are you writing that particular text? For example, if it's in an interview setup or you're having to do the interview in this instance, you're going to check, what is the purpose for this interview? Am I being interviewed because I am maybe a celebrity? Or am I being interviewed for a possible job? And therefore, the interviewer is going to ask me certain questions and I'm going to have to respond to those questions. Okay. So you are going to look at what is the purpose of that interview, for example. And so you're going to then look at that and it will give you the idea of the content that you need to include. Thirdly, grade 12s, or secondly in this situation, is the audience. So in other words, the person who's going to read this particular piece of work, which in this text, in this case, will be your markers. However, the question in your head should be, who is this text being aimed for? Or who am I writing it for? So let's say, for example, you are writing in response to an application, an advert that was done for an application for a vacancy. So you want to now apply for that vacancy. Then remember, the audience in that case would be the person who's advertised the job, maybe the HR consultant or the personnel manager, whoever it is, okay? So you're addressing that person or that group of people, for example. If it's a speech, you look at the audience, okay? So who is this text being written for? Okay, then thirdly, you're looking at the register. In other words, how are you going to write this piece of work? Should it be in the formal setup or the informal setup? And therefore, if it is a formal letter, you're going to say, does it have the correct tone that I want to use when I'm talking to a manager, for example, or when I'm addressing the president, for example? Have I used the correct tone. So all of these three things become vital when you're dealing with the transactionals. So your purpose for the text, why are you writing this text? Your audience, who are you writing this text for and who are you expecting a response from? And then thirdly, the register. Okay, formal or informal, and obviously have you addressed the people correctly, the addressee. Okay, and then the last thing I want to mention to you is your format here. Please, grade 12s. We always say format, format, format is incorrect. You gotta know that if I'm writing a particular letter, there has to be these details. These certain technical details must be there. If I'm having a newspaper article that I'm drafting, there has to be, for example, who the journalist is. You got to include details that are relevant. You got to make the structure be in terms of the columns that need to be used there as well. So those are the things we're looking at, your format. So ask yourself, what kind of format is applicable to the text I have chosen? So as I mentioned, if it's a letter to the editor, obviously you're going to have the formal structure of a letter there. So there should be two addresses that you're using there, okay? If you're writing to your friend or your aunt or your uncle on an informal basis, obviously there'll only be the one address of you as the sender and the recipient at the bottom of would you just say yours sincerely, for example. There'll only be one address, okay? But if it's a formal one, there will be two addresses that needs to be used. Okay, so furthermore to this transactional pieces is you obviously need to take note of when we are marking the particular piece of work, what are we looking for as markers? So the first thing we're focusing on is the criteria of the content. So in other words, do I see relevant content? So if your content is not matching the topic, it becomes nonsensical or it's not relevant to the topic. And therefore, you will be marked down according to the ratings in the weights in the on the rubric. So please, content and your weighting is very important there. Your weighting for your content is about 60%. So, your content and your planning. So 60% of that mark is going for your content and planning. Have you planned in terms of how we view that? We're saying, can I see a logical flow of ideas? Can I see that the candidate has the introduction, the body, the conclusion? And within that, he has a topic sentence. He has an important point he's elaborating in that paragraph and he continues in the next paragraph. Those kind of things is what the marker will be looking for, okay? So content and planning, 60% weighting. In other words, it's 15 marks out of the 25. It's quite a big chunk out of 25 there, okay? And then we're looking at the second criteria, which is your use of language, your style, and editing. So did you take the time, firstly, after you've written your piece, did you take the time to edit, check for grammar errors? Is there a punctuation marks being used incorrectly? Did you check those things? Have you checked the spelling that you have used of certain words in your piece? Okay, because it doesn't make sense to write a nice piece of work that is flowing in the right way, good ideas being mentioned, content relevant, all those things, and then it's riddled with spelling errors, for example, and language errors in terms of concord errors and things. So please take the time to look at the language that you are going to be making use of here. Remember also, please, that the language you use is very important when you are talking to an editor or you are referring to an HR manager. If you become overtly rude or you become verbose and you just become aggressive while you're writing in terms of the words you are using, then what's going to happen is you're not going to get a favorable response from the recipient. So you want to remain polite and you want to make sure that he registers what you are saying and he gives you a response that is obviously going to make the both of you become amicable with each other or agree on what's going on. All right. So your language, your style, and your editing is having a weighting of 40% there and a chunk of 10 marks. So 15 plus 10 giving us 25 for the transactional. And that's now times 2, remember, for 2 pieces. Now, grade 12s. If you have no idea what transactionals you have done thus far, then if you have taken the time to revise now, or you are going to be revising, please take note of the relevant pieces that are under the transactionals. All right. As per your CAPS document, which you've been working with your whole life in school, you have categories with regards to the transactionals: A, B, C, and D. So in category A, the genre would be very much focusing on your formal letters or your informal letters, okay, your friendly letters. We're looking at letters in terms of a letter of request for help, for example, or donations or sponsors. You're looking for a letter of application in terms of a vacancy that might have come up in a particular company. You're looking at a letter to a business owner, for example, that you would want to write to the CEO of a company. Maybe it's an issue with his company that you want to address with him directly. That will be a business letter. If you're looking at an issue where you bought something and you didn't like it, you were dissatisfied with what you bought, you're now going to complain about it, that would be the letter of complaint to the relevant person. If you want to pass over sympathy or condolences, or you want to spread some good news to your aunt or your uncle, for example, then you'd be making use of the friendly letter, and that would be more towards a sympathetic way of writing it, okay? Letter of congratulations, for example, or thanks for something. So these are very much important letters that you will be working with in category A. And if you want to maybe write to the press, remember, if you're writing to an editor or the press, you will not get a response immediately or say, okay, I register your comment and whatever it is. It is there to make them aware of what issues you are finding with what's been published. Okay, so that is also important to take note of. Then in category B, so that's done. Category B, we have your curriculum vitae, which will become important for you, grade 12s, because remember, you are going to be applying for a job after you study, okay? You need to then have all of your credentials sorted on a piece of, on the paper, on the template, sorry, and you're going to include your biographical details. You're going to include relevant achievements you have over your lifetime, all of those things, qualifications and things. So that format again and that important information is contained in your curriculum vitae. And then coupled with that is also the covering letter. So there'll be an introductory letter to you as a person, or the personality, your personality traits that you will talk about as a covering letter for the curriculum vitae. And then you've got the obituary that you also have in category B. Now remember the obituary there, I'll speak about it a bit later as well, but recall it is obviously when somebody has passed away, you now are going to construct the obituary. Then in terms of category C, we have your report writing, an informal report or a formal report, depending on what is questions asking of you. You have also reviews that we deal with here, which would be anything between a book review, for example, or a restaurant that you have visited, for example. All right, a restaurant review, or maybe a film. Oops, 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 oops. Let's close that off. Maybe a film that you have watched over a time frame, and you're now going to have to review it for the audience. Okay, so that would be your reviews. Then you have your newspaper articles versus your magazine article. Again, remember, newspapers are a little bit more formal, and there you're going to be writing for the majority of society that's going to be reading this. Your magazines has a certain target audience. For example, they could be a mature audience, or they could be a youthful audience. Your teens could also have their own magazines that they're going to be reading. So these are things you'd be taking note of when dealing with the magazine articles. Then remember your agenda and your minutes. Now that would become very relevant in life when you are in the business setup or when you're having a meeting with somebody. Okay, so when you're getting into that setup, remember people are going to send you an idea of what they're going to be talking about, and that's the agenda. Okay, within um, a template. Okay, and thereafter those issues that they are proposing to talk about is the agenda. With the minutes, it is then a record of what was said about those issues during that meeting. So your minutes would have to tie in with the agenda, for example, unless there's issues that are arising after the ones you have spoken about. But I'll give you information about that just now as well when we're going through it. All right. So the agenda and the minutes are then as a combination for your category C. And then category D, we have where you're dealing with the speech, which is either an informal or a formal speech. Again, your audience here will dictate whether it's going to be a formal or an informal speech that you're writing. And then remember, when you were tested about your speeches, around speeches in the year, that was the oral response. We are now dealing with the written response. The formal speech or the informal speech, it has a certain format as well you need to take note of. And then we have the dialogue versus the interview. All right, remember there will also be differences. A dialogue is when two people are having a conversation with each other and it's recorded. All right, an interview on the other side, remember, is someone's asking questions and then there is a response coming from the second person that is being spoken about or spoken to. So we will then deal with these things as we break them down during the course of this lesson. All right, so that is as per your CAPS document, the genres that you have with transactions. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty parts, please always go back and refer to the writing process. It's crucial that we cover all the steps when we are working with this paper. So firstly, you're going to make sure that you have planned a response. You have constructed a diagram, for example, or wrote points down on the question paper of each of the topics that you are looking at choosing. All right. So brainstorm your ideas. Make sure that the content you have or you have plotted is linked to the topic that has been asked of you. The key words that you've highlighted in the topic will have to have matching content in your response. So this is basically that pre-writing phase. So don't spend too much of time on it, but spend enough time where you can get a sort of a fully fledged idea of what you want to say within that that transactional. All right, or that essay. So your pre-writing phase is your planning. Once you've done that part, you're going into the second part of this, or before you write, the drafting process, okay, your final piece. So your drafting process now is here where you're going to use those key ideas, those key points you've mentioned on your planning phase to create your story or to create your plot or to create your response that you want to write for this essay or this transactional. So make sure that it ties up there, okay? You're drafting it in terms of the word count here as well, all right? And the structures that I spoke about, where there's introduction, body, and conclusion. Once you've done that, you're then going to do what we call revision, or you're going to revise the piece that you've constructed. So you revisit and you check that the draft that you have actually states what you want to state in that response. So if it is not relevant, you still have time to change it before you give in the final piece of work. So amend your ideas here at this point, grade 12s. All right. Then when you get to stage 4 or step 4, it is the editing process. Here again, so you notice from 1 to 4, it's basically all the drafting, the revising, the editing. making sure you've taken note of everything. So when you're editing in stage 4 or step 4, you are checking, have I used correct language? Did I make sure I used the correct spelling of words? And did I construct sentences that are relevant? So for example, you will recall there's various types of sentences, from your simple to your compound to your complex sentence, right? There's also statements versus um, phrases and clauses that can be used, okay? So all of that becomes relevant when you are dealing with the editing phase. Make sure you check that if you've used those particular types of sentences, that you have used it in the correct way as well. Okay, words in terms of spelling, remember, like there and there can be very much mixed up. So they sound the same, but their spelling is different, and they also can mean different things in certain instances. So make sure you are aware of the language concepts here as well. Okay, and then finally, you're going to the publishing section, which is then in this case the submission of your final response for paper 3. Okay, so there you'll do your final product as I've mentioned to you here. Okay, so make sure you are familiar with the writing process. Now, let's go through the genres, and let's look at some important things that you must take note of if you are making use of them. So if you were going to use the formal letters, or you chose the formal letters, now be careful, grade 12s, that if you may get two letters that may pitch up in this particular paper. We don't know what's there, okay? They may give you a formal letter to an editor, or they may give you an informal letter to your friend. There might be two um, letters that come through. But remember, I mentioned to you that the categories are there. So usually we are saying that the examiners and in caps, we can't test the same category throughout the paper. So there will be a variation across the categories. So whereas in category A, I might have a formal letter, I can't then obviously give you the informal letter as well. I will then probably have to move to category B or C or D and maybe give you the speech, for example, or the report that I need you to work with. So please familiarize yourself with the categories as well. Okay, so if there's letters set for you in this paper, remember each of them will have different requirements, and you need to obviously make note of those requirements. But the common ones are the following ones that I'm going to mention to you. Purpose will be very important, because either you're going to be looking at applying for a job vacancy, or you're going to give your views on an issue of concern, maybe to an editor in the newspaper. You may be wanting to complain to the HR manager or to the manager of the store for bad service or products being sold. You may also want to request information, for example, from one of the officials there who are in charge of the company about a certain product or a service that's been rendered. Or you may want to express sympathy, and that would then be obviously the informal sense where you're writing to a family member, sending your message of condolences, for example, or sympathy for what has happened in their life thus far. Then remember audience as well. I did mention to you, it's the person we're writing to. It could be somebody we know or we don't know. And if you know the person personally, then your way of writing would be very much different compared to a person you don't know. But in either way, you're going to obviously be more formalized. Okay. So that is one thing you need to take note of. Also, your tone is very much formal when doing the formal letters. Always be polite, because remember, you want a response. So if you're going to, fly off the top and just start insulting the person and saying how bad their company and how bad their service is and blah blah blah, and you continue to, be very negative, then how can you expect a positive response from somebody? It's not going to happen. So you need to obviously make sure that you are always polite to get a response from the recipient. Okay? Also, please remember your format is very important. Okay, I did mention to you in terms of the letters. Now we're going to look at the following. There has to be an address and a date of the letter. Okay, there has to be an address of the recipient. So the first one is your address, the second one is the recipient's address. So on when you see your paper, and if you're sitting like the way I'm sitting, for example, on your right hand side, right, is where your first address will come up, and that will then be the address, which is your address. Okay, and underneath that will then be the date on which you're writing your letter. Then to the left hand side, your left hand side, where your margin is, then you will then have the second address, which is then the recipient. So let's say, for example, it's the editor, the Daily Sun, based in Braamfontein, for example, postal code 4000 whatever. Okay, and then that is the second address. So you've got two addresses and the date already included. After that, you're going to leave a line, obviously, and then you're going to include the salutation, where you're going to obviously be formal, and you're going to say, for example, Dear Mr. Mokobe or Sir, Madam, okay, that you're going to then write to. And then again, leave the line, and then you're going to write the reason for that letter that you are sending now. Okay. After all of this, you are then going to include your introduction, and then you have your body of your 2 to 3 paragraphs here, and then we've got the end, the conclusion that's done. After the conclusion is done, we got the ending and closing. So here you're going to say, for example, yours faithfully, if it is the formal response. Okay, if it's the informal, you can go with yours sincerely. So yours faithfully will be the closing, and if the state letter was started with the name of the person that you knew, then you can then maybe say yours sincerely if it was, for example, Mr. Mokobe, who you spoke about or spoke to. All right, so underneath that yours faithfully, you will then do the signing of your signature, and then you will put underneath the signature the name of the person, not your name, please. Okay, remember, we're not allowed to know who you are in terms of marking. Okay, so the name of the person, and in brackets you can write Ms., for example. Okay, and then the relevant part then obviously is your content, the next part there. Please also remember the topic will lead you to the content that we want you to be speaking about. So always refer to the topic before you decide that this content is relevant. So if you're going to say something, make sure it is matching the topic before you write it in there. All right, plan your opening paragraph, because that's the crucial one. That's your introduction. Organize your two ideas there to grab the attention of the reader, to make them want to stay and read this letter or this particular complaint letter that you're writing, because you need to organize your ideas now. Okay, so the central points need to be in that paragraph, and you're going to then organize what you want to say. Remember, if you're arguing or you're putting a point across, there has to be a logical flow. So your paragraph 2 will deal with the first issue. Then paragraph 3 goes into the second issue. Paragraph 4 deals with the third issue, and you continue like that. 2 to 3 paragraphs, please, because if you start writing more than that, you're going to go over the word count of 200. So make sure that the points you're putting down are logical, and they are going to be able to strengthen the points you are making. Okay, to make sure your case is heard. Please always be concise and to the point. In other words, I also say to you, please practice KISS. Keep it short and simple. Don't complicate the matter. If there's a fly on the wall and the fly is there and it's done A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you're going to say you are disappointed with the fact that there was a fly on the wall and it had done A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And you continue. What was the issue that this fly had caused for you that made you so upset? Okay, for example, if you are doing the letter of complaint, be concise and to the point. Remember, nobody also has time to sit and read a piece of work or to read a letter or to read a speech that is so far away from what needs to be included that it becomes cumbersome, or it becomes almost irrational to sit there and read it. So don't put yourself in that situation. Make sure that the title and the content matches throughout, but be concise. Get to the point quickly and effectively and efficiently as possible, if that makes sense to you. All right. So the next thing in terms of the letter, remember, was the register. I did say to you, it's always going to have a degree of formality because it is dealing with people out there in the business world, your editor, your manager, your HR manager, all of those people, okay, who have professional standing. So please, formality must be there. Politeness must be there. It must be acceptable to the audience that is then being targeted here. And it must be relevant to the purpose. In other words, why were you writing this particular piece? Remember that. All right, then. So the letter should be, please, clear and straightforward, concise and to the point, and logical. Don't talk nonsense. If you're going to ramble on just to make sure that you have reached 200 words, then rather cut it short. Okay? Get to your point. If you get your point to 80 words or 90 words, it's still fine. Just get your point across and we will still be able to mark. Obviously, the not as good a mark, because remember, your content needs to be 200 words or 180 words. So if you're going to say it in 90 words, you've already lost a lot of other words that you could have used to say what you want to say. But if you're struggling to get a point across, again, it means you didn't plan well enough and you needed to revise the topic that you had chosen, for example. So be logical as well, please. Your style, remember here, grade 12s, please look at the word choice that you're using. All right. Does the sentence that you've used here, does that sentence make sense? Does it have an appropriate tone that I have used in this particular sentence construction? Right? You don't want to be overtly aggressive, and you also don't want to be too polite where this person thinks you're just a walkover. So please also remember that. Please write the letter in the direct, simple English. Don't go for words that you can't spell correctly. Don't go for words that you think, if I use this word, I'm going to sound more important or I'm going to sound like very knowledgeable. That's not what we're testing here. We're testing to see, can you get a point across? Can you make sure in simple, straightforward English that you've addressed the relevant person with the relevant content and you've been appropriate in the way you put it across? You weren't being rude. You weren't being obnoxious. You got your point across in the simplest way possible, but you made sense in what you were doing. So your style becomes very important, okay? Please avoid using your slang and your colloquial language. It's not going to go well if you're going to be making use of such language, okay? Contractions, if you have to use it like maybe once if you can, or twice, but don't make it a habit of using it throughout. Abbreviations and acronyms, steer away from that, please, because sometimes you use it inappropriately and we're thinking, okay, what is this learner actually trying to speak about? So if you're going to use them, also be very clear that you're using it as a minimal of one time at least, okay? But steer away if you can, completely from it if you can. Avoid unsubstantiated accusations, meaning that if you are accusing the editor of being negligent in the content that he has published, for example, all right, if you're doing that, then remember you have to have the evidence as to why you're saying that. So if you're going to say something, it must be substantiated, it must be justified. Don't accuse them of something that you think they've done but there's no evidence to back it up. So avoid that. Avoid making a threat, because that threat cannot be carried out, or it may not be carried out. So it doesn't really make sense to threaten somebody. Emotional language, you know, maybe you become so passionate about what you want to say that you start becoming very much manipulative in what you are saying to the recipient. So steer away from those kind of things. Steer away from sarcasm. It doesn't go down right well as well. Okay. Cliches, meaning, sometimes being overused, that kind of thing. Don't really use it, because remember, we want you to be as original as possible with this piece of work, and we want to mark your work, not what Arthur said, or what Steve or whoever said these things. Okay, so be careful. Right. So the next thing in terms of the formal letters is the using, or the making use of your modal verbs such as would, could, and should. All right. Please don't keep on using them because it sounds nice to keep on using. I think we would be better if we did this. We should have done that. No, all of those things, really steer clear if you can. So if you're going to use it, again, use it appropriately, not more than it actually needs to be used. Your more formal phrases and your expressions, example, I would be grateful if you could send me, instead of please send me. So that kind of phrasing of sentences need to come through as well. Okay? Be more polite in how you get your point across. Good. So with the formal letter, please always check the following: your sender's address, your date immediately after that beneath the address. Thirdly, the intended recipient's address. Fourthly, the salutation where you are greeting Mr. So and so. The next part, number 5, is your paragraph 1. Oh, sorry, you would have the issue also beneath that, okay? Then you got paragraph 1, which is your introduction, stating the reason for your letter, or the purpose for your letter. Paragraph 2, possible causes, for example, or consequences that you want to raise because of the issue that has happened thus far. Paragraph 3 could be a further explanation of another issue, maybe, or you can then go the route of giving us possible resolutions to the issue that you have mentioned so far. And then obviously you've got your final salutation here, where you're going to include then yours faithfully, your signature, and then you're going to sign off with your initials and surname of the sender as well. All right, so that is your checklist in terms of your formal or your informal letters. Again, here's the layout of the formal versus the informal letter. You would please remember there's address 2 and address 1, address 1 only, 1 and 2, and then here is dear and the reason. There's the date there, for example, on the formal, and the same thing is happening here, except there's no second address on the informal one. And then you continue to write. So in your spare time, again, before you go and write, go quickly and look at the layout of the formal and informal letters that we're going to be testing you on. And as I mentioned to you, the crux of the matter is always link the content to the topic that is given to you. All right, the question will dictate what content needs to be included. So read the question 3 to 4 times, please, before you start to construct your content. Okay, right. So then the second genre is the speech that I want to mention to you. Please, I did mention to you that in the year you had been tested on your oral address, your speech. Now we're testing the written account of the speech. Now, it's not the same speech you did in class. No, there will be a topic given to you in the exam paper, for example, and this is where we're testing you in terms of the structure of the speech. The topic will guide you here on the content, as I've mentioned previously. When you're writing the speech, think about the following and adapt. Firstly, what is the style that I'm going to write, or how am I going to write this particular piece? Is it going to be a serious speech? Is it going to be a humorous speech, content that is, serious or humorous in content? Am I taking note of my audience? Okay, is that audience going to be a formal setup of professionals, for example, or my friends listening to me, the purpose of the occasion that you are going to be part of to deliver this speech. So, for that example, let's say you were going to be the MC of an event. Obviously, then there will be a formal speech that you're going to have to construct. If you had to give a speech at your friend's birthday, 21st birthday, or 17th birthday, or whatever it is, your friend, and maybe he has his parents there or his aunts and uncles, and that's a different setup, a formal setup compared to the friends who are 17, 18 years old, where you can, be more humorous, share one or two anecdotes, or one or two incidents that happened that were funny that only you guys remembered. That kind of content will be relevant for the youthful kind of approach. If you're having the more mature one and the formal setup, again, you will then do the other one I spoke about. So your purpose of the occasion is very important. All right. Then further on to that, grade 12s, is when we're looking at what a good speech is all about. Remember, it's about capturing my attention as um, the reader in this case, or the marker in this case. Are you able to capture my attention and hold my attention with the content that you are giving me? All right. Can I then follow what you're saying? Can I make sure that I am, intrigued and I want to read further? And that will only come from the content that you have given. There must be the paragraph form, okay? Remember, every paragraph deals with a certain issue. The tone can either be formal or informal, depending on the audience again, and that would come out again in terms of the topic that you have chosen. Your opening or your greeting to your particular audience, again, keep it brief, keep it simple. Don't go and spend more time introducing yourself or greeting the audience than actually delivering your content, or writing your content. Okay? Always include an outline of the speech. The subject you're going to be talking about must be included in your paragraph. Secondly, highlight 4 ideas that are important that you want to discuss in each of the paragraphs. Okay, do that in your introduction, so it almost lends itself to, okay, the reader will follow. In the first paragraph, I'm going to see this issue maybe, or second paragraph, I'm going to see this issue, or third paragraph, I'm going to see this issue, and the audience or the reader in this case will be able to follow that. Okay, so highlight 3 to 4 ideas at least that you're going to be speaking about. And then with your conclusion, always make sure it's logical, it links the content again with what you've said thus far, and it links to the topic that was given to you as well. All right. Appropriate closure, please, grade 12, because again, you don't want to leave that speech hanging in the air for someone to try and figure out what you say. Right. Then please also remember, you can go on the internet and look for your own speeches or samples of speech. Again, make sure that when the speech that you're listening to or you're reading through, they have a topic and match what they are saying. Make sure that what they are saying actually links to the topic as well. And that will be then how you would gauge a good speech. So you'll go through that, okay? Then your checklist, please always make sure your audience is taken note of. Remember, it's an oral address. The style can either be formal or informal. It can be humorous or serious in its content. The purpose of the organization or the occasion in this instance, would be very important to take note of. Have you then had paragraphs included for each of the content that you're talking about? Have you discussed key ideas that are relevant again to the topic? 3 to 4, as I mentioned to you, is there a logical flow with the ideas? And do you have an appropriate or a good closure to the speech that you have written? Also, have you developed clear points? Now, again, that's important for us to gauge clarity. Does the candidate know what he's talking about? If he doesn't know what he's talking about, he or she is going to ramble on all these nonsensical things and try and fit it in there. But if you know what you're talking about, you will have an idea of the concepts that are relevant that you want to talk about. And you will then have matching content to the most important topic sentence in this case, in each of your paragraphs. Okay, so develop your clear points. And then obviously your language usage, I did speak to you about that. Right, so your dialogue and your interview now, grade 12s. These two, I've always linked them together because remember, there is a fine line, as I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson. So the dialogue is a conversation between two or more people. So it's a record of the exchanges in terms of the conversation that happened, the ideas that were exchanged between two people. It is directly the words as they are spoken in the moment between the two people. Those words are recorded in the dialogue. So remember that there will be a structure which I'm going to go through as well. The interview, on the other hand, it is similar to the dialogue, but the difference is that there's one person who is asking questions and then the other one is responding. So if it is a job interview, for example, or maybe a chat show that you were part of, there will be someone who's called the interviewer who asks you questions, and then the interviewee is going to respond to those questions. Okay, so that's the crucial difference between the dialogue and the interview. So in a conversation, there are two or three people, yes, but there's an equal share in the conversation. In the interview, there are two or more people, and I'm going to say only two here because remember I did say to you there will be a probing from one person to and the response comes from the second person. So the person's main goal here, or the interviewer's main goal, is to get information from the interviewee about what issue they're talking about. Again, that content will come in terms of the topic that's given to you, and you need to be aware of that. Okay, so it has to be the sense of the interview is gauging or gathering information about a concept or an idea that has happened, or a candidate that has applied for a vacancy. They're now being interviewed, and then there would be a response coming to the questions. Whereas a dialogue is the verbal exchange of ideas between two or three people. So that is the difference there. Right. So remember, the dialogue's written in such a way where it appears to be spontaneous, natural, free-flowing conversation. You got to place yourself into an imaginary position of two people and how they would exchange their ideas. So that's something that you need to be taking note of as the writer. Okay, then in terms of this, please, both of them, keep it brief, get to the point quickly. All right, the dialogue that goes on for too long, grade 12s, becomes too laborious. It becomes like it's just a tennis match where there's two brilliant people playing against each other and they respond one after the other to each other, and there's no way that they can break the um, the momentum of each other. So that if it goes on and on and on, it becomes a bit tiresome. So right in the point of getting the point across in the quickest way possible. So win that point as soon as you can, as opposed to lingering on forever. All right. So avoid small talk, please. Capture only the important information, as I mentioned to you. Give your characters unique names. So don't go there and put down names that are very, ordinary, that we know of everybody, everyday names. Think about different characters that you can be giving, different character names that you can be using as well to make your piece unique. All right. So look at your word choice again when you are working with it. Please be consistent. Keep your characters the same as far as possible. Don't change them along the way because then it becomes difficult to keep track of who is who in this conversation or in this interview. Create suspense. Make us want to read a little bit further or think a bit further. Read your dialogue out to yourself, but obviously not loudly because you're in the exam room. So while you're reading, you will try and imagine how it will sound if you had to read it out loudly. Okay, and then remember the names of the characters are always on the left hand side of the page. There will be a colon that separates the written words on the next part, or the direct words of the person and the character's name involved. Okay, the colon does that, the break in communication. A new line also then indicates that the next speaker is going to now be recorded. Your advice to characters or readers on how to speak or present the action must be given within the brackets. Now, again, there, please don't write a huge scenario within brackets and think we're going to now, oh, be so impressed by this. Get to the point in that content there as well, okay, of what you want to say. So don't make it a long, drawn out process. Sketch the scenario as quickly as possible of what's going on so that we can continue reading what you have written. So the next particular piece I want to focus on is the review. So your dialogue and interviews done, dusted. The review, remember, again, grade 12 is an individual's response to a work of art, maybe a film or a book or an occasion that was attended, or maybe a restaurant that you had attended and you did and you had to do a review on that. So those kind of things is what we're looking at with the review. So you have gone somewhere, you've read something or you've seen something, and you now have to give us a review of what you have noticed about these things. So when writing the review, you have to include the following: the title of the movie or the book. That's very important, because remember, the person cannot just imagine what you're talking about. They got to know that you are talking about this book. For example, you're talking about The Picture of Dorian Gray, and you now read the book and you're reviewing the content. Was this content relevant? Does it make a difference to a grade 12's life, for example? Would you suggest that other grade 12 learners read it? All of those ideas must come through in the review of the book. The same thing with regards to the movie. Maybe you had watched a movie like Equalizer with Denzel Washington. So now you're going to be like, okay, what was important that happened in this movie that would make other learners at the same age bracket go and watch it? Maybe the technical detail was brilliant. The imageries that were used there was over the top. Maybe you felt it was just not, too much of money being used and a waste of money. All those ideas must come through when you're doing a review. Okay, so the title of the book or the movie or whatever it is you are reviewing must be given. The author must be given if it's a book, a director if it's a movie, the producer or the publisher would obviously be mentioned if it's a book, or if it's a director, if it's also a movie, you would include that details, right? Then you would also make sure that you include a brief discussion of the following details as well. Important is when somebody watches something or reads something, or and there has to be a reason that they want to refer other people to it. So include the setting that was maybe appropriate or good, or inappropriate. Talk about that idea. Talk about the characterization. Maybe you felt there should be more characters involved, or there should be more waiters that should be at a restaurant, for example, or there should be more of a love triangle. Whatever it is, talk about how you felt these characters should have been played around with. Then look at also stylistic effects. Did they do justice in the way they portrayed certain characters or characteristics of people? All right. If it was a book, was the style in which this book was written, was it appropriate? Would you suggest a different genre perhaps for the content that was dealt with in this book? Those kind of things you're doing with the review. All right. And then we obviously want you to please include the judgment that you have come to with regards to this particular book or movie. So you would then be the person that would suggest either we watch it, or we read it, or we don't watch it, or we don't read the book or the movie, because you are the one that's reviewing it. So your viewpoint is vital for the next person to either like or dislike what is being showcased. So you gotta be coming up with a judgment, but again, it's a substantiated judgment. And then you would come up maybe with a recommendation if you believe it's not a good read or it's not a good movie to watch. Tell us why. Okay, so that is the review and what you need to be looking at. In terms of the format, remember, there would have to be an introduction, like with everything. The introduction will provide the brief background of what is happening. It could be the third film or the third book or a third installment of whatever it is. In the body, you're going to again include 2 or 3 paragraphs, a brief discussion of key incidents, for example, without giving away the plot of the movie or the book. Don't do that. And then the conclusion will be the last paragraph where you again tying up all the loose ends. Okay, again, your style and tone becomes again important. You're going to obviously remember it will be very much a formal tone and it will then be very subjective in its response. So there's no one else that's there. It's only you doing the review or watched the movie or read the book. So your viewpoint will be what is included, being very subjective. So you look at the following. Did you include factual details like the name and the title of the place? Have you noticed or noted, sorry, the name of the author, the lead actors, the characters, that kind of thing? Did you include maybe the recording details, the publisher's details, if it's relevant? Did you include an area, for example, where a book was published or where the book was, setting of the book, for example? And did you make use of paragraphs when you had done this review? Okay, now the review and the report is a little bit more complicated. If you're that candidate who is not really comfortable with these ones, rather go for the ones I've spoken thus far about, okay? If you also maybe are wanting to become a journalist or you want to keep up with the trends of being a youth advisor, then the magazine articles could be appropriate for you. Again, if it is tested, the title will lead you on what needs to be included. So the newspaper article, or in this case, the magazine article, is written to either inform somebody about something or persuade the viewpoint of the reader or entertain the reader about issues that we are speaking about. So the style and the tone of the article is very important. Okay, and it will differ from article to article, depending again on whether it is a local magazine or a newspaper article for a school magazine or a school newspaper, or it is for the majority in terms of the national or the local municipalities that we are living in. So those kind of things will dictate the content as well. Okay, so when called to write a newspaper article or a magazine article, you've got to state the facts briefly but accurately. Again, remember, this is crucial. Substantiated facts must come through, please. Right. Then, please make sure it's not long-winded and it doesn't include unnecessary detail. You've got to get to the essence of what you want to say in the quickest way, as I mentioned to you, and you want to give the crux of what happened if you are doing the newspaper article. Right. The heading has to be attractive. It has to be interesting for us to go on to read further. It has to be lively. It has to be neutral or informal, again, depending on the style that we are writing, okay? But so directly going towards the reader here. Names, places, times, positions, and any other necessary information must be included in the article if it is relevant, okay? So there you will look at the structure and the format. Then please remember to have them in paragraph, the content split into paragraph, and it should keep the reader absorbed throughout that 200 words. So let's look at an example here from the DBE paper. A group of ex-convicts and former gang leaders started a youth development program in your community. The success of this program deserves praise. Now you will notice that I've highlighted or I've bolded certain points or key ideas that needs to be mentioned. And why have I done that? Because this is the question. Write an article to be published in a magazine in which you highlight, is important, what? The successes of the project. And you're going to do what? You're going to convince the reader that a similar project would need to be initiated. So you already can see where I'm going with this, using the W's and the H, for example, okay? So the purpose has to be noted, all of those things. So write an article to be published in a magazine. So here's the question. Where will this article be published? In a magazine, in which you are going to do what? Highlight. So what must you do? You're going to highlight, give important information about the success of the project. So what? So where, what, and what must you highlight? Okay? And what are you going to do then? Convince the readers. So that is the purpose. You are going to convince them that this kind of project needs to also be initiated in a similar way in the community. All right. And then you obviously going to be talking about this part, which is the second part of the question, which is your instruction of what you need to do. So with the topics, you will get the first part, which is then the statement, and the second part of it would be the question that you need to answer. So you have to convince them that a particular project like this needs to be initiated. Okay, so that is your newspaper and your magazine article. I did mention to you, ask yourself certain questions. So you will ask, is my article based on factual news? An opinion that I have given, is it a relevant piece, my opinion? Is it a feature article, for example, that I need to take note of? Did I arrange my content in columns for easy reading? Did I make use of subheadings, for example? Did I keep it short and factual and straight to the point, or have I kept it long and discursive? All right? How easy is it for my reader to go through my content? Has he been able to gauge specific information? So that is the kind of questions you're going to ask yourself when you're constructing your articles. Okay? And then the obituary, grade 12s. Remember, the obituary, please, is not always going to be there, but if it comes out there in the paper, you need to be ready and you need to take note of certain things. And that would be the issues that I'm talking about here. Remember, it's a notice of a passing on of somebody who is known by the target audience, which is the people who are going to attend the funeral here. So over and above formally announcing the death, you are going to look at the cause of the death of the person and the funeral arrangements. It's written in the third person, please. It's not the eulogy, which is then the speech that's given at the funeral. You're not doing the eulogy, you're doing the obituary. Hence, you're going to be paying tribute to someone who has passed on. You're going to include, for example, in the opening, the full name of the deceased, the date of his or her birth, the cause of death, and where the person was living at the time of death. The middle paragraphs will then dictate the following or look at the following issues. The biographical details of the character. Maybe a brief life history in terms of the date and the place in which he was born, the schools or the achievements or the education qualifications or the various occupations that this particular deceased had been or had achieved in their lives, or what they had done. And then you could also maybe talk about an achievement, maybe one or two achievements. Maybe he or she was involved in community work or charity work. You will talk about that. All right. In the final paragraph, please, or two, you need to include the survivors of the deceased. And that's the immediate people and the details of the funeral service that's going to take place. So list those people who are like the parents, the siblings, and the spouse. Give the details of the funeral that's going to take place and the date and the venue that at where it's going to occur as well. And then please conclude with a message of condolence, because remember, that's always good to do at the end. All right, and then there's your checklist on what you're going to be including to make sure that you have done the obituary appropriately. And then we've got the email. Now, the email is probably the easier one to do if you get tested on this. Remember, it's electronic communication sent from one device to the other. And here we are testing the content. So please go through the notes your teacher gave to you. All right. So we're dealing with the email. Remember, this is what it looks like on a computer screen. So on your screen, you will see right now that there will be a recipient. In other words, two. That is what we're going to talk about there. Then we're talking about the CC, which is the carbon copy, which is the email address of the person you want to receive an exact copy of this email. Okay? And then we've got your message. So we've missed here the subject. So maybe there's something you want to say in a one-liner there of what this content is going to be all about. And then this one here is your message. Again, please include all details that are relevant, and that will come from what the topic's asking you about. Okay? That is where our 180 words will come from. So please be careful, all right, when you're structuring the email. Okay, so there's many advantages to this. Besides the fact that there's free delivery, there's global delivery that can take place on the e-platform, all right, and there's an instance delivery. So with regards to the emails in the paper, it is a shorter way of responding to a transactional if you just manage to ensure that you have the structure correctly. All right, and then lastly, grade 12s, my recommendations to you with regards to your paper 3. Please practice, practice, practice before you get to that exam room on Monday. Make sure you have gone through at least the last 3 to 5 years of papers, because the variation of topics is going to then be there in the last 3 to 5 years, and you'll be able to tackle all the genres that have come up in those papers. We cannot say, for example, that this one's going to appear and this one's going to appear and then just hope and pray it comes there. No, you've got to be able to answer all of the genres that are going to be tested. All right, so go back and practice, please. Always choose a topic that appeals to you and that you are knowledgeable about. Don't make the mistake of writing about irrelevant stuff. Please plan the response using that mind map or the brainstorming technique. Keep your audience in mind constantly. Please finish the transactional with an intriguing conclusion. Don't leave us hanging in the loop. Remember, we want to get a response from a recipient. So make sure you tell the recipient what you would like them to do for you, or respond, or how they should respond to you. Please edit your work thoroughly, grade 12s, both in the essay and the transactional. Do not give a piece of work that is full with flawed language, with spelling mistakes, with incorrect construction of sentences, and it's just a slapdash effort, and then you expect to get marks. Please don't do that. You'll be putting yourself on the back foot before you even start to write the exams. So check your content at least 3 times before you submit. Write from your own experience as far as possible. Be sincere in the content you're giving. Listen to the news. Listen for general ideas. Think about engaging scenarios that are happening in the world so far. Events in countries that may have happened over the last couple of months, for example, or year. That would be an advantage, because that's where the content would more or less be coming from in terms of questioning. Your formats are crucial. Go over them. Remember, if you want to get the majority of marks, content linked with good format is going to give you the marks here. Go over the difference between your various letters, difference between interview and dialogue, that kind of thing. Use the appropriate format for each of the genres, please. And make sure that you always cross out the rough work that you do not want the markers to mark. There must be an edited piece that is shown to us, please. Not a full piece, but there must be evidence of editing that you have done in that paper. Don't give us the same response and say, this is my planning and this is my final. It's not going to work, okay? And please, do not write comments to your marker. He or she doesn't want to know who you are or whether you're going to take them on a date, for example, or whatever. No, that doesn't make any difference to the marker's life. Remember, you are just a stat at the end of the day. That number, your examination number, is who you are. And ma'am or sir is not going to be marking your paper at the end of the year to remember that Varsha's exam number is 54321 and therefore I must look for that paper and mark it. No. So don't do that kind of thing. Don't even think about things like that. And don't write a personal comment to say, please, I forgot to finish the draft, forgot to finish the final. Please mark the draft. Makes no difference. That's the national exams. It is an exam paper. It will be marked according to what needs to be included. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, you're not going to get the marks. So take your time, go back. The next 48 hours is crucial. Make sure you master all of the content I've mentioned to you. You go over your genres. You are ready and you are set to go and get that A or that B in this paper that you are targeting for paper 3. I want to thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, grade 12s. It is the final lesson for paper 3. When we do come back in the following weeks, we will be looking at your paper 1 and paper 2. So please join us for those lessons as well going forward. Thank you again for watching this lesson, and I'll see you really soon again for another lesson in English Home Language. Thank you, grade 12s.